we mentioned the general congregations, so the so-called pre-conclave meetings. So when the Pope dies, as soon as he dies, all the cardinals are summoned in Rome to meet all together. Because, as I told you yesterday, now the government of the church is of the cardinals. There are strict rules for that. They always meet in this place. This place is the Synod Hall. It's also the place where there are synods, when there are synods. Then I will show you a map. They always have to wear it's called the filettata rossa, the red filettata. It's this uniform cardinals have. It's not that they can come in clergymen or whatever. They have to wear that. They have to wear the red hat. They have to wear everything. Because this is an official moment. It's the moment when it's called sede vacante, vacancy. The Pope is not there. So they're governing the church. General congregations take place for a while. What do? Just to give you there are two kinds of general congregations. One is the general congregation, so all the cardinals. As I told you yesterday, cardinals who are more than 80, as soon as they turn 80, they're not eligible to vote in a conclave. But for the congregations, they're summoned. They must participate in the meetings. So they come. If they're not in Rome, they come generally. Because you don't participate in the elections, but you're always a cardinal. And the cardinal is created by the Pope, which means that his position does not change. He can be the head of a dicastery, he can be a bishop, he can no longer be a bishop, he can do nothing in his life, he stays a cardinal. So whenever the Pope dies and there is this thing, they come. And then there is the particular congregation. Particular congregation is for the ordinary things. I told you yesterday, when congregations meet, they figure out what to do with pragmatic issues, mostly money. How much does thing cost? We need to approve the balance sheet. It's a series of things. But then there are the ordinary things. Like, they have to prepare the synod hall. Every day they must clean up. They must collect all the notes, because even the general congregations are covered by secret. It's not just the papal election. The discussion is internal. They can generally speak about their discussions, but they cannot reveal who actually said what. Then they do that. But generally they shouldn't. There is a secret for that. So if there are notes or whatever, there is somebody that after the meeting comes over and collects everything. Because it's secret. The particular congregation has to decide these very specific things. Camerlengo, as I told you, Camerlengo does all the administrative things, not a vice pope, the administrator, with 3 cardinals. 1 cardinal of the rank of cardinals bishops, 1 cardinal of the rank of cardinal priests, 1 cardinal of the ranks of cardinal deacons. I told you yesterday, cardinals are in 3 ranks. It's not that they're different kind of cardinals. They're always cardinals. The ranks come from the ancient church, when the Pope was the bishop of Rome, and then around Rome, Rome was divided in territories, and the cardinals were the ones who governed the territories with the Pope. So deacons were for the poor and generally the social things, priests were to manage the parishes, bishops were because Rome had 9 suburbicarian dioceses, so 9 territories that were under a bishop around Rome. These 3 people change every 3-4 days. Every rank elects them, but it's just a choice, but they change. The Camerlengo stays, they change. It's in a way to make the thing, they say, collegial, so that everybody can participate in the ordinary. Now we show this. You know what is this? This is Domus Sancta Marta. Domus Sancta Marta, as I told you, is a hotel. Domus Sancta Marta is the place where cardinals have to be during the conclave. Not before the conclave. Before the conclave, they can live wherever they want. And I would say it's even not suggested to go in Santa Marta, because people live here. So when the Pope dies, all the people who actually live there, you can come. All the people who actually live there, they have to leave their rooms, clean up everything, go away. Then they can come back after the conclave is over. But they have to leave. You see, it's a hotel. Here there is the entrance. You have 4 floors. Pope Francis made the decision to stay here. So he never went to the Apostolic Palace, where there is the papal apartment. He wanted to stay here. He did not stay in the same room as he was during the conclave. How do they decide the rooms? There is a ballot. So during one of the general congregations, the Camerlengo takes a ballot and they just take out names and numbers randomly. There must not be something decided before. So the rooms are given by luck, generally. In this case, in this particular conclave, we had a problem. Pope Francis used to live second floor because in the second floor here, there is a suite. The suite, number 201, Pope Francis moved there because it's a suite. So it's a small apartment in the end, like 40, 50 square meters. There is a sort of dining room is a big word. It's a place with a sofa where you can actually receive people, and bedroom, okay? But he's the Pope. So for security reasons, all the floor needs to be shut down. Because the level of security for a Pope is the level of security for a head of state by international protocol. Just to give you a concrete example. Pope Francis did not like the armored cars. So he liked the smaller cars, like Fiat 500. He used to use the Fiat 500, you saw that. Fiat 500 is not big enough to be armored. But the armoring of the car is part of the protocol for head of state. So what happened? Whenever the Pope wanted to pass through a street, there was an extra effort by the secret services, military forces before. So for example, all the streets were presided with snipers because somebody had to check. And also all the trash bins were vacated and there were snipers all over because you needed to guarantee that kind of security. In this case, you need to guarantee that the Pope has an escape place, not considering the fact that a Pope is always with his doctor. Even during a papal flight, in the papal entourage, there is always a doctor and an anesthesiologist. Because in case you need an urgent surgery, it's the Pope. You need to do it right away. So there is always something like that. Santa Marta has like 200 rooms or more or less. But there was no space for cardinals. Because cardinals, in this specific case, were voting in the conclave. There were 135 cardinals voting in a conclave. We say 200 rooms, but some of the rooms are not used. Some of the rooms are mostly for meetings. So 135 will be okay if this floor was not shut down. Then we said yesterday that when a Pope dies, everything that was around the Pope is shut down. Nobody can touch it. The pontificate is over. Pontificate is over. It's sealed. One of the first things the new Pope will do is going to the sealed apartment to open it. It has to open it. It needs to be a ceremony. It needs to be clear that it's open by the new Pope. Okay? So the big problem was that you had to find other places to let them sleep. But the conclave is a moment when they have to be all together. You see all these windows? These windows during the conclave, I could not take pictures because, as I said, during the conclave, all the Vatican City is shut down. They're shut down like this, and they're nailed. They cannot open. There is no possibility. Now, Santa Marta, on the other side, gives the face to Italy. So you can actually see it. There is no possibility for a cardinal to see outside the window and receive messages. They must be secluded. So they found a way. There is a place here. You cannot see it. It's called Santa Marta Vecchia. It was the old college of Santa Marta. It was used as offices, and they set up like 10 rooms here in order to have all the cardinals all together. But this is the place where they made a ballot during the general congregations. One of the things they do a ballot. I'll show you this. This is the Vatican city-state map. I wanted to show where things are actually, so you understand better. So, St. Peter's Square. I know it's in Italian, but this is the best picture I could find. So it's big enough. So, St. Peter's Square. This is the border with Italy. Here it's Italy, here it's Vatican. Okay. This is the Basilica. Here is the so-called Holy Office, dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. This was where, Galileo? Galileo was imprisoned here, in this place. This is the Paul VI Hall. The Synod Hall, it's in the Paul VI Hall. It's one of the rooms here. So cardinals, when it's sede vacante, cardinals come from here, enter here, and go directly here. Nobody can see them. It's very quick. Or they can come from here. It's another room. It's another entrance. Here is Domus Sanctae Marthae. This is the place. You see, this is Italy. So you can actually see from outside. This is an entrance. It's called Perugino. The Sistine Chapel is here. It seems different because, Vatican museums are here. You never enter from here. You enter Vatican museums like long way to go. But Sistine Chapel is here. It's right on the side of St. Peter. So when cardinals live here during the sede vacante, and then they have to go to vote, there are buses, mini buses. They come pick them up. They go up here. They enter from here, and there is a stair that goes directly there. But it gives you another idea. When there is the Mass, we'll see that tomorrow, the Mass before the conclave, the Mass that begins the conclave, actually, it's in a chapel in front of Sistine Chapel. So when you see the procession, the places are all mixed up together. It seems you are in different places, because in television you see different things, but they're all together. Just to give you another idea, Sistine Chapel, Apostolic Palace. Here you have the papal apartment. So Pope Francis used to live here, but used to work here. Generally, the Pope lives here, works here. Vatican Secretariat of State is in this building, in second loggia, second floor. In the Vatican, we still call loggia the floors, actually. This is the Cortile San Damaso, courtyard of San Damasus, where a head of state comes to visit the Pope. He enters from here. This is for cars, and the car goes through here, goes behind. It enters from here. It goes one courtyard, two courtyard, three courtyards. Here, there is the welcome. So when you see in television that there are Swiss guards welcoming the guy, he's here. When you start seeing how things work, it's very nice because, you never see the map completely. So you always think that there are so many places. In fact, it's all, this is like a napkin in Rome. It's like a very small place. But you see, Vatican museums are the biggest things you have. These are all Vatican museums. Think about that. And it's 3 floors. So it takes a lot of time. So this is a part, more residential part. So you have some small churches. There is the Vatican police and these Swiss guards. And this is the Vatican parish, Sant'Anna. But I wanted to give you an idea where they are. So they're in Santa Marta. They have the meetings here. They're in Santa Marta. They go for elections here in Sistine Chapel. Not all the papal elections were in Sistine Chapel. But now, according to regulations, according to Universi Dominici Gregis, what I told you yesterday, Universi Dominici Gregis made the final decision that every papal election ever must be in the Sistine Chapel. But not every election was there. The first conclave, known as a conclave, so no with people locked with the key, was in Viterbo, because the papal court was in Viterbo, that is a small city north from Rome. You know why they started to have a conclave? Because before it was more public, this thing. Because cardinals had been there in Viterbo for 2 years, and they did not come to an agreement for 2 years. So people get angry, so they shut them in, they locked the door, they just opened a hole in the shelter, and they just gave them bread and water as long as they didn't elect a new pope. That's a true story. That's a true story. And then after that, they started making this because it helped. Among the things you discuss in the general congregations, there are specific things. One specific issue dealt with this cardinal here. This is Cardinal Becciu. Now, you might not have heard the story. The story is important to understand the conclave. It's not important to understand the story, because the story is complicated. This cardinal here, back in 2022, was under investigation, and Pope Francis made the decision to leave him in the College of Cardinals, but without any position. So he was prefect of the Cause of Saints. He was the head of the dicastery, no longer there. I told you yesterday, all cardinals are member of dicasteries, no longer member of dicasteries, but he could keep the cardinalatial title. This is a big thing, you know, because it happened in the history of the church that the Pope stripped cardinals from cardinalatial title, but the cardinals were no longer cardinals. They could not wear red and anything else, but he could. Then for a while he could not even participate in meetings. Then Pope Francis called him and said, well, you can participate because you're always a cardinal. So after 1 year or two of this measure, he was in the meetings. Meetings mean that, you know, masses, every papal masses, all the cardinals who are in Rome go, obviously. And there is a presidence. It was like the list of cardinals in terms of presidents, but always there. And upon papal invitation, Becciu was tried. You know that cardinals cannot be tried. Cardinals can be tried only by cardinals. This was a criminal lawsuit in Vatican City State. There is a big difference between Holy See and Vatican City State. The Holy See is the international entity. The Vatican City State is the territory, it's just the state. Since it is a state, it has a court. Becciu was investigated for an alleged embezzlement. So before being the prefect, just to give you the idea, he was sostituto, so he was number 2 as Secretary of State. And he delivered like 175,000 euros to a local Caritas, a local charity in Sardinia, his hometown, whose president was his brother. Now, was not a criminal act because mostly sostituto can deliver money wherever he wants. Second, it was for charity. Third, yes, the brother was president, but because it was the Caritas of a tiny village where everybody is a relative to another. Plus, this money were never used by the Caritas because these were money for a specific project that still hasn't gone through. So the Caritas had the money, but there was this investigation, and it was a very strange trial. I'm just leaving the details out, but I've been in like 96% of the hearings, so I could tell you a lot about that. And in the end, he was like pled guilty for embezzlement and sentenced to 7 years prison, but you know, this is appealed, so now we're in the appeal phase. So it was like not definitive sentence. But in the meantime, he started going to the meetings of cardinals and so on. So the big problem was, is Becciu still eligible to go in the conclave or not? Because on one hand, the Pope stripped him of all his cardinalitial prerogatives. He was not in the decision-making meetings, he was not in the dicasteries, and so on. On the other hand, the Pope kept him a cardinal. And according to regulations, and that's a fun story, even an excommunicated cardinal has the right and the duty to vote for a pope, even if he's excommunicated, because the cardinal is created. So if the Pope created him, he has a dignity that goes beyond these acts. Yes?
Okay, but is that even possible to remain a cardinal even while excommunicated?
If the Pope didn't strip you from cardinalitial title, you're still there, because the Pope creates you, the Pope uncreates you. It's a possibility. It never happened, but it's a possibility. So there was a huge debate. These general congregations, in this case, there was a huge debate. Because since he participated in all the meetings and also in the papal funeral with the cardinals, dressed like a cardinal and whatever, so the big issue was, I am still a cardinal, so I participate to the pre-conclave meeting. So he went to participate. And cardinals started discussing, because it was like whether Pope Francis wanted it or not. But Pope Francis was dead. So the big issue is this, that once the Pope is dead, if nothing has been made public, no decision can be made. For example, I told you that Pope creates cardinals. The Pope can create cardinals, secret cardinals, okay? They're cardinals in corde, in the heart of the Pope, okay? These cardinals are not revealed. Why he does that? For instance, he wants to create a cardinal in a place where Christians are persecuted. So it's better not to show that there is a cardinal there. So it's called impectore in the Pope's heart, the cardinal impectore. So the Pope says, when he makes the announcement of all the cardinals, he says, I create cardinal 1, 2, 3, 4, plus 2 impectore. You never know who they are. Then, when things are secure, 2, 3, 4 consistories later, years later, or the year after, whenever the Pope wants, the Pope says, well, I create cardinals 1, 2, 3, plus this cardinal impectore from that consistory. And he reveals the name. When John Paul II died, there was one impectore cardinal that had not been revealed yet. Nobody knows who he is. The Pope died. This cardinal never existed. Because if there is not a provision and the Pope makes the law, as I said, when the Pope dies, nobody can do anything, because the Pope is the Holy See. The Pope does not represent. The Pope is the Holy See. The Pope is the head of the Church. So we never know that. In this case, it was the same. According to the regulations, the College of Cardinals, gathered in pre-conclave meetings, can only take in consideration papal writings if they've been specifically addressed to the College of Cardinals. Specifically addressed. So when the Pope died, if the Pope left a note, like to my fellow, to the College of Cardinals, I would like 1, 2, 3, they have to read it and take it into consideration. But not any other circumstance. So if the note is vague, no. Does not exist. Can be there, does not exist. It's on their sentiment whether they want to take in consideration or not. But the Pope is died. Is dead. This is what I used to say to all the cardinals who asked me. Well, we had discussions during these things, and they always ask, but what would you do? And my point was always, the Pope is the Pope, but the Pope is dead. So this thing went on and on for 3 days. Until, you see, this is the Francis signature. Pope Francis signed like this. Until Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State, came out with a note that nobody saw, because he didn't show, he just said that it was there. Somebody saw it, but it was not publicly exposed, saying that the Pope, from the hospital, signed with an F, just the F, not the whole signature, a note that said that he didn't want Becciu to be in the conclave. There was a huge mess and a huge discussion, because in a normal situation, Cardinal Parolin, in the beginning of the discussions, had to call the Dean of the College of Cardinals, had to meet with him and say, I have this thing with the Pope, what should we do with this letter? And then they had to decide in the particular congregation. But he did that 3 days after the discussions. And so the debate was huge, because there were people that didn't want Becciu to be in the conclave, also for personal reasons, because sometimes, sympathies and antipathies matter. Seems stupid, but it happens. And others that said, well, but if there is not a measure, a provision, a law, or something that the Pope signed before dying and is public, because it needs to be public, Becciu shouldn't go in the conclave. Now, how did they solve that? They actually didn't. At one point, Becciu got tired and said, well, I drop it, I'm not coming. Because the debate became so heated that he didn't want to stay there. But this was the first 3 days of General Congregations were about this. General Congregation does this kind of discussions. General Congregation discuss about money, as I said. General Congregations set the date for the papal funeral. According to regulations, for the beginning of the conclave, sorry. According to the regulations, a conclave cannot begin before 15 days after the funeral. Why is that? It's very pragmatic in the end. First, because when the funeral starts, as we said yesterday, there are the Novengels. So the 9 days of mourning, you don't do an election in the 9 days of mourning. So 9 days, they're gone. Then consider this. You have, in this case, 134 cardinals. One was sick and didn't come for the conclave. 134 cardinals need to come from all over the world. So, the guy who's in Budapest takes him flight, 1 hour and 40 minutes, is in Rome. The guy who is in Tonga, there is a cardinal in Tonga, it takes a little more. There are no direct flights. Then these people are old. So sometimes they need to have layovers, long layovers, because they cannot have this kind of long trip. So you give time to everybody to be able to get there. Actually, the College of Cardinals, at one point, when everybody gathered, they can make the decision to anticipate a little, but never before 12 days. So you never have a conclave before 12 days after the funeral. So you never have a new pope before a month after the death of the old pope, generally. So when there was this rush, it's just because they didn't know that the regulations did not even allow. Because people need to meet, they need to understand each other. As I said, the conclave is a ritual has its time. Okay? Now, I'm trying to anticipate something we're supposed to do tomorrow, but since we spoke about that yesterday, it's better we clear it. One of the things we did at the end of the General Congregations is the breaking or the annulling of the fisherman's ring. So I found the pictures where it happened. You see, this is the calligrapher, Damiana, Enea. And you know what they do? They just take the fisherman ring and it's called a biffo in Italian. They just make in a way that any printing cannot work anymore. They have to make it publicly. Everybody must see. Generally, it's at the end of the General Congregations, because there are many acts of the Pope that are already done, but they have not the bull. What is the bull? I'll show you. First of all, I want to show you how this is the fisherman ring of Foglio, but just to show you how it's done. And why it's because yesterday there was this idea of forging. Why it's very difficult to forge? Well, you see, it's very specific. Every ring is a very specific thing. So forging this, it's kind of, you need to know the proportions and everything. It's handmade and tailor-made for a pope. Every pope has one. And what do they do with this fisherman ring? There is also the Leo XIV behind, they do this. I'll show you. This is a ball. This is the fisherman ring. This is any official act of the church is with a ball with the Pope. You don't see it, but there is. The Pope, this is the ball for a bishop, Bishop Pennacchio, that is a bishop infermo in Italy. It's a small diocese. But because the bishop published it, so I could show it to you. So anytime a bishop is appointed by the Pope, he has this. This is the official appointment. This is all done by the office of the calligraphus. You see, it's very specific the way it's written. This is always the same calligraphy, never changes. This has been like this for centuries. And at the end of that, the Pope with the fisherman ring puts this. It's very, very hardly forgeable. So that's why you annul it. So there are no other interventions. Nobody can say that the Pope did something after he died. You need to do that. Yes?
And does the Pope personally put his ring into someone?
Generally should. Practically there is the office of the Secretary of State that does that. Generally should. But he has to loan it for a while and then he has to wear it. He wears it all the time. It's pretty nice. If you ask your bishop, he has. Every bishop has this. But also, for example, if you become head of a Vatican dicastery, they give you this. Because all these acts, it's called Acta Apostolicae Sedis. Every year, there is an annual yearbook published by the Holy See with all the acts, with everything like this. It's been published forever. So when you go to the Vatican library, you go and check for these things you find. And endless things like that. But that's why you need that, and that's why you biff it at the end. I like biff as a word. It's fun. You might want to know what other discussions they do beyond the Becciu case. Well, every cardinal has 3 to 4 minutes to speak. They can prepare an intervention. They speak personally in front of everyone. And they say pretty much whatever they want. This is an exchange of views in order to check what are, according to cardinals, the priorities for the church. Some of them spoke about family issues, for example. There was one cardinal, Cardinal Stella, we know that because he told that, who spoke very much about a specific issue that was the way Pope Francis governed and how these things were going to affect the new Pope. To be specific, Pope Francis made a huge reform in the Vatican. It's called Curia reform. It's the reform of all the Vatican dicasteries. So before Pope Francis, you could not lead a Vatican dicastery if you were not at least Archbishop. Why is that? Because, as I told you, either it's the Pope, either it's a college. There is no way in between. The Pope is a bishop. So if you want to be in a college with the Pope, you need to be at the same rank as the Pope, bishop. So that's the reason why they made the decision that all the heads of dicasteries, they need to be bishops. And I will tell you more. Since John the 23rd, no cardinal can be less than archbishop. So if you're a priest and the Pope creates you cardinal, before becoming a cardinal, you need to be ordained archbishop. Because in ancient times, there were cardinals that were not bishops. But then there was some confusion sometimes because some priests matter more than bishops. some lay people were governing and bishops couldn't. There was some confusion. It could work when the Holy See had a state that was the Pontifical State, which was pretty big territory, going from Rome to Bologna, so pretty much. And in that case, it could work, because the public administration was the same as the spiritual administration. But when things were not like that, there was a certain confusion. So John 23, to avoid everything, said, okay, let's be everybody in a college. So a college is when everybody is at least archbishop, same rank. There are obviously exceptions. There are some cardinals that ask not to be made archbishop, but stay cardinals. But they get the exception only if they're already more than 80. So they don't go to vote in a conclave. Because in a conclave, you need to be in a college. Same rank. But what Pope Francis did was to change this norm and to say that it was not the ordination, but it was the canonical mission, which means if the Pope says that I'm eligible to lead a dicastery, I'm eligible to lead a dicastery even if I'm a layperson. Obviously, this comes with some issues. For instance, what you do with the Secretary of State, because if the Secretary of State is not a priest, is a layperson, you have some issues because the Secretary of State also intervenes in issues that go in relationships between bishops and the state. So if he's not at least a cardinal or a priest, he's in a position that is closer to the state than to the church, sometimes. So they said, well, there are positions that still will be the same, but we need to have this principle. But this principle made things a little messy. And so this cardinal, Cardinal Stella, went to the synod, to the pre-conclave meetings, saying that he hoped they could restore the old provision, not because he didn't want lay people to be at the top levels, but mostly because it was more functional, and also because bishop ordination means something. It has a meaning. So if the bishop, because when you're ordained bishop, you got the so-called three powers in the end. That is the power of governing, the power of teaching, the power of being priests. Munus docendi, munus governandi, and so on and so on. So if you don't think about, if you don't believe that ordination matters, then everybody can be whatever. And that was the idea. So one of the discussions was about that. So they also discussed about why and how they want to go on with the church. Now, outside the conclave, we talk about geopolitical issues. We had an Argentinian pope, now there is gonna be an African pope. There were a lot of discussions like that. We speak about age. Well, we need a pope that is not young enough, because otherwise there is a long papacy and so on. And we still believe that cardinals discuss about these things. I can assure you not. They don't. And I will tell you why. Because in the end, they need to make 2 or 3 decisions that are very clear. The first is that they're going to decide who is the guy who's going to be on top of everything. So they want somebody they know, first of all. You know the Academy Award, the Oscars. What happens at the Oscars? You know, it's not that all the best movies win the Oscar. But mostly it's all the movies that have been displayed the most. So the lobbies, because there is this academy, and the lobbies made in a way that the films go to the most people of the academy possible so they can see the movie. There are very good movies that never get an award because the production is not rich enough to send it. The same is a conclave. There are very great cardinals that never get to be pope because nobody knows them. You need to know each other. The second thing they think is that, is this guy going to be kind or not? And the third thing they think is, and they compare with the guy who died. We want the same thing as before or something different? These 3 things, mostly. So you can ask me, why Prevost? Because that's the big question. And the response will be fun and very more pragmatic than what you might think. As I told you, cardinals are always members of dicasteries. They're members of as many dicasteries as the Pope wants. Prevost was made member of a couple of dicasteries before he was cardinals already. He was cardinal already. And there were two key dicasteries. One was the dicastery of bishops and one the dicastery for the clergy. So the dicastery who actually chooses the bishops from all over the world, and the dicastery oversees the priests all over the world. And he was member when he was still a bishop, not even a cardinal. Okay? Then when he became a cardinal, Pope appointed him in other seven dicasteries. Prevost is that kind of person that goes always very prepared to meetings. So not only he participated in the plenaries, but he read all the papers, always. And I can tell you this because I saw it myself. Because there was one time that I was working with a bishop's organization. I was advising them on communication, and there was this plenary meeting, and Prevost was the prefect of the dicastery of bishops, so he came to the meeting. The prefect comes to these meetings of bishops. He doesn't have to know what happens. He comes, celebrates a mass, stays there. You know, it's mostly like a father or something like that. But Prevost came, and he actually read all the papers we sent him out. He studied everything. He knew pretty much what was going on. He went to speak with every bishop. He knew every problem very clearly. And I've been told he did like that everywhere. But if you're a member of 9 dicasteries and you participate in 9 plenary assemblies, you meet 85–90% of cardinals. So 85–90% of cardinals knew him. And knew him is this kind of guy who was very kind and very, very thorough. Then there is another issue that is fun. Prevost is from US. He's American. So his mother language, his mother tongue is English. Now, if you check the cardinals that were participating in the conclave, 78% of these cardinals were created by Pope Francis, so in the last 12 years. Pope Francis made a point to create cardinals mostly from, he said, peripheries. But cardinals from peripheries, in many cases, they haven't studied in Rome. They don't speak Italian. Or they speak Italian because they get to learn. When you become a cardinal, generally you try to learn something because when you come to Italy, when you come to the Vatican, the working language is Italian. But still, they don't know Italian very well. But they speak English. And so Prevost had a chance more because everybody understood him better than anyone else when he spoke. He spoke English. This conclave is the first conclave in history where the common language was not Latin, was not Italian, was English. That makes a difference, a huge difference. Think about that, huge difference. Pope Francis made there were 20/30 African cardinals and 20/30 Asian cardinals. And that was we're talking about 60 people. It's a silent majority. When you need 78 votes to be elected, because you need to get to the third, 60 votes, it's a huge silent majority. And we knew nothing about what they taught. This is what journalists keep saying that they know, but you don't. Personally, I don't know what the Rwandan cardinal thinks because he barely comes to Rome. When he comes to Rome, it's rare that I meet him. He doesn't participate in public meetings because he's Rwandan and, let's face it, nobody cares. It's a bad thing to say, but this is what happens at one point. So you don't have the occasion to talk to him. You don't know what he thinks. But you have 60 people, you don't know what they think. And that's why it's very hard to make a preview on what happens in the congregations. And this is why it's important to know how things develop in the congregations, because things develop very differently. 13, Prevost is 70. You know, there is an old phrase in the Vatican that says, we want a holy father, not an eternal father. Because, you know, if you're very young, like John Paul II was elected, he was 58. It's 27 years. But the general point with this is that you cannot preview anything. John Paul I was elected rather young, less than 70, and everybody thought it was going to be like a very long papacy. He died 33 days after he was elected, 33 days. Pope Francis was elected 78 and already pretty much sick, 76 and already pretty much sick. And everybody thought that it was going to last 4 years, 5 years, and then he died because, like, very sick, you have these responsibilities. He stayed 12 years. So you see that this age thing is not something that can actually work, and cardinals know that. Because you cannot preview what life is. You know, you can live a lot, you cannot live a lot. Cardinals can discuss about priorities. They cannot discuss about candidates. They do that, but formally they couldn't. It's not that there are meetings that they back some candidate or another, for two main reasons. The first is that formally there is no candidate. Formally, every Catholic can be elected Pope. Even me, even you. Even if you're not a priest, you can be elected Pope. Then obviously you have to become priest after, you know, if you accept that. But everybody can be elected Pope. So there are no candidates because it's the Holy Spirit. And secondly, because since it's the Holy Spirit, you don't make agreements because you're messing up with the Holy Spirit. So formally, cardinals cannot talk about people. They do all the time. I mean, let's face it, they do it. But most of the things happen during the conclave at lunch and dinner because it's the moment when they speak. And you see, the pre-conclave meetings are still very interesting words because they live outside. So they go out. You can meet some of them, you can discuss some issues, they have an exchange with the external world. But then they enter in the conclave. As I said, the conclave is completely shut down, which means that you have 130 old people with no connection with the outside, with no possibility to discuss anything else but that. And things move very quickly. A guy gets 15 votes, then goes for lunch, makes a bad joke, and loses 10 votes. Like, not kidding, it happens. Because, you know, it's just like when you have your meetings among students, it's the same thing, it's the same kind of character. In pre-conclave meetings, they still go out. But then there are issues, because when they go out, they start freaking out sometimes. There was one cardinal, I will not tell you who was it, and they started to be looked after by some cardinals. So some cardinals were thinking that they could vote for him. And he started freaking out. And he had a nervous tick for all the time being. You know, I was like, Andrea, like that all the time. And I was kind of shocked because this is a very calm man that used to live in a place with terrorists, and he manages the terrorists very well, but this thing was freaking me out. Because this is a small world. It's a small world. Yes?
But he didn't want to be a pope, or? Sorry? So he didn't want to be a pope?
No. Nobody who's sane or mind wants to be pope. So think about being a pope. What does being a pope means? You're a pope. You have no personal life anymore. You don't have it. Your life is no longer. You're never alone. There is no time for you to be alone anymore. There is always some secretary around that in case he's there. Okay? Yes, this guy goes to play tennis, but even when he goes to play tennis, the Vatican police is around. No personal life. Okay? Everybody's checked. All the problems of the world are on you. So you have dossiers after dossiers after dossiers every day, and you have to make a decision. And you have a lot of people talking you out or walking you through the decisions. And you cannot know everything because you're always human. You know, it's true that the Holy Spirit shows you, but you're always human. So you make mistakes sometimes, because it happens. And then you freak out because you made a mistake. Sometimes the mistake is very bad. Sometimes the mistake is fixable. You don't know. But these mistakes multiply with time. And you're always there under pressure. And then a lot of people from every government all over the world, they want to meet you. So every morning you have an agenda, schedule of meeting that you can't manage at one point. Sometimes you don't even know who you are talking to. You know, this guy, this Pope is young enough to still understand that. But think about, you know, Pope Francis at the end. And he had this like schedule of meetings and he was already sick. It's kind of hard to keep up with everything, but you have to do that because it's your life. And then, you know, you have to organize the trips. Everything you say, it must be taught in advance. It's very rare that you have the possibility to go there and speak of script. And when you do, it's a problem, because when you speak of script and you say something that is not precise, you're always the Pope. You want to do this life? Because it's not just huge responsibility, it's all the world on your shoulder. When Prevost got the fisherman ring in the mass, the installation mass, there is a moment, you'll check the video, that I will bring you the video tomorrow. He gets the ring, and you see he stops, looks at that, and yes, a moan, because he figures in that moment what he's into. You want to be a pope only if you're a pathological narcissist, which happens also, but you know, mostly it's a service. You think you're ruling, but in the end you can't rule because there are so many things that you cannot make decisions about. Plus, and there is one more thing. You're cardinal, and you're a king in your small world. You know, you're Cardinal Bishop of Milan. You're the king of Milan. I was in New York like in February when there was the installation mass of the new archbishop. And Cardinal Dolan, that was the former archbishop, was retiring. And I was entering the church, entering the cathedral, while Dolan was still hanging out to see how things were. Dolan in New York was the king, but I'm not kidding, you know. He was walking by and people stopped him, greeted him, kissed the hand. Not kidding, kissed the hand, you know, like in the ancient times. We're talking New York, not talking Europe. And they did that. You know, you are the king there. Then you come to the Vatican, yes, everybody looks after you, but in the end you cannot make all the decisions because you don't get to know everything. So you're the king, you're dependent. What do you want? So that's why they choose somebody that they think they can bear for a number of years, but in a way that they can still make decisions, because life is pragmatic, guys. You know, now, we've been talking about rituals. The rituals here help to remember you that what it's gonna do is a spiritual thing. It's something for the faith, first of all. It's not something that, it's not just governing. It's something for faith. Governing is part of that. You have a structure because the structure helps to bring the faith. The Holy See, the Pope, why did the Pope create a state? Pontifical states were born out of a very specific situation. Donations, mostly. Now, you know, there is this story that in the Middle Ages, it was found that the document of the donation of lands by Constantine was forged. So there was the issue that the donation of Constantine to the church was forged. It was a forgery, and so the church shouldn't be allowed to have territories. But the thing is different. In ancient times, when the emperor wanted to give a territory, he didn't need to write a document. He gave the territory. Just said that, this territory is yours, it's over. But with time, when princes came over, a lot of people wanted to get lands from the church. So how did the church defend it? They forged a document. They forged something that actually they had legitimately. And in fact, in the end, even if it was found a forgery, nobody took over the lands, because it was like generally acknowledged that the lands were given. But when they took the lands, what they did a state in a way that they could protect the Catholics in the state. If you govern, you're more secure, you're more sure that you can bring religion the way you think it's good. So that was the idea. If you govern, no prince, no king, no duke, no baron, no one can come and take your territory. If you govern and you have not any geopolitical interests, so you don't make wars to conquer other lands, then you can also advocate for peace. So the reason was very pragmatic. It was a reason to protect religion. Also because Catholics became a state religion with Constantine, 313, but in that world it was plenty of pagans and people that didn't like it, so they had to protect these people. I will tell you more, and I will anticipate something that we're going to tell tomorrow. You see that the popes were white and wear this red mozzetta, it's called. It's this half-shoulder vestment. Why it's red and white? Because it's the Roman Empire's insignia. So Constantine, when Constantine made the Catholic faith, Christianity at the time, because Catholicity and Orthodoxy, and they come after Christianity in general, as state religion, he handed over the imperial insignia. They will tell you that the Pope is white because at one point Dominican Pope Pius V wanted to keep the white robe of the Dominicans. It's not true. That's a story that came after. But mostly the issue, and if you see all the popes, just Pope Francis didn't want the red mozzetta, but all the popes have the red thing. It's white and red because, think, Roman Empire, the toga of the Roman Empire, white and red. And to the Christians, that was the symbol that you pass from a civilization of the empire, a civilization of war, because it's conquest, it's attack, it's expansion, to a civilization of love. So the providence of God brought us this insignia that we use to bring in the world the real emperor that is Jesus Christ. That's the symbolic idea of that. That's why the Pope wear white and red. Then the red shoes that this Pope does not wear, but generally Pope can wear red shoes mostly. Pope Benedict used to wear them, not even John Paul II wore them. John Paul II had brown shoes mostly. But red shoes were another symbolism, but it came after. Red shoes because it symbolizes the martyrdom. It's the blood of the martyrs. And it goes along with the red of cardinals. Cardinals are red because they're created by the Pope and they're ready to give their blood for the church. All these symbols make a connection. All these symbols tell you something. When I told you in the beginning, general congregations, they always wear with the filettata, so with this like cassock, black cassock with red garments. It's because you need a uniform to give dignity to the moment. You're not there in your private capacity. You're there as a cardinal. Yes?
Since you're talking about the garment of the Pope, what happened with the tiara?
The tiara, Paul VI made the final decision that the tiara was no longer needed because there was no longer a kingdom, there was no longer a pontifical state, but just Vatican City State. And so the tiara is now in Washington, D.C. It was like given in auction for the poor, because John Paul VI wanted to give in auctions, and the Archdiocese of Washington bought it. And so if you go to Washington, D.C. in US, and you go to the National Shrine, that is right behind the Catholic University, you see the tiara. Have you seen the series The Young Pope? You haven't watched that. You see, when they ask the tiara comes from there. Paul VI simplified some of the symbols, and there is this general understanding that Paul VI cut the old symbolism. It's not true. Paul VI adapted the old symbolism. There were a series of positions in the papal family that were no longer existent anyway. For example, there are two structures that deal with the papal visits. One is the pontifical household, and one is the protocol, the Office of Protocol of the Secretary of State. Who manages the papal visit, the papal audiences? Who manages the visit of the Pope? When a head of state visits the Pope, who manages that, according to you? The protocol of Secretary of State or the pontifical household?
The household.
The household. Why? Why is not the protocol, why is not the diplomatic protocol? It's always a head of state to head of state. There is a reason,
Isn't it because it's a monarchy, so the Pope's family?
The Pope family welcome you because the Pope is first of all the head of Christianity. So it's the Pope's family. The protocol of Secretary of State enters after the Pope's family. When there is a state visit, a real state visit, what you see now in television, when the head of state go to visit the Pope, these are not state visits. They sell them as state visits in their countries because obviously if you say that the president went for a private audience to the Pope, it seems bad. But state visit is a very specific protocol. State visit means that the Pope delivers a speech. The president or king delivers a speech. Then the Pope introduces the guest to the diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. Then if the guest is Catholic, yes, it's not a possibility he has to go to St. Peter's Basilica. The chapter of St. Peter's Basilica welcome him and he has to pray on the tomb of Peter because it's evangelization. Okay? Last state visit to the Vatican was President Mattarella in 2014. Because then it's overly difficult to organize everything like that. You know, you also need to have the full square St. Peter emptied because the court that needs to pass there takes a lot. But in that case, when the Pope delivers the speech, on the right of the Pope, there is the prefect of the pontifical household, so head of the papal family. On the left, the papal almoner, so the head of the papal charity. Because the idea is that the Pope welcomes you with the family and help your people with charity. Everything has a meaning there. We can go on and on with this for a long time because everything has a meaning. Everything has a meaning. But Paul VI, to come back to the question, made the decision, some of this pontifical household had some positions that were no longer used. For example, the Marshal of the Conclave. We spoke yesterday about that. So actually the layperson that locked the door was reorganized. There was no need for these nobles being there. Or there were other positions like the so-called scopatori segreti, which were mostly janitors, and you didn't have that situation. You didn't have a court in that case. But when Paul VI reformed the pontifical household, he just cut some of the positions that were no longer needed or no longer up to time, but he kept the protocol, he kept the language. So it was a sort of reformation, but without cutting with the past. It was different, obviously, but it was not a break. It was just adaptation. The tiara thing was a little bigger, and there was a huge debate about that. But Paul VI was a very modern pope. If you start studying Paul VI, you understand that Paul VI has been the pope that did more things than anyone else in the last 60 years. We used to speak very much about Pope Francis and how Pope Francis was for the poor and the workers and whatsoever. But the only pope ever to celebrate a Christmas Mass in an Italian industry with the workers striking because they were losing their job was Paul VI. Paul VI went to Taranto, it was a petrol company connected with the port of Taranto. Very bad situation because a lot of workers were dying by cancer because there was petrol. It was like, you know, we're talking about the 60s. All these security issues were not in place now. And he celebrated the Christmas night Mass in Taranto in the fabric with the workers. You know, nobody remembers that, but there are pictures, so there is a testing. So Paul VI did a lot to change the image of the church. Paul VI started the international trips. Before Paul VI, the popes didn't use to travel so much. John XXIII had a trip, but it was a very short trip in train, the only papal trip in train, to Loreto and Assisi, but to entrust the Second Vatican Council to St. Francis and to the Virgin of Loreto. This trip was all in train, but there was another moment when a pope used the train. And it was John Paul II, but it was by chance mostly. So he was coming back from India in 1985, and he snowed so much in Rome. It never happens. But it snowed so much that it was impossible for the flight to land. So they landed the papal flight in Naples, and then they caught any train to get back to Rome. True story.